Hello and welcome back to another DF Retro Play, where we go through old games and discuss them in real time between the full-scale real DF Retro episodes. This is always a great chance to look at some other games that may not warrant a full episode, but usually I'm the one that picks the game. Well, this time, since good old Audi, who has joined me several times, has always endured the bad games that I've selected, especially on the CDI, I let him pick something today instead, and I think this one is not so bad. So, what are you showing me today, Audi?
Alright, hey people. So, I am showing you a game based on my favorite comic book of all time, Usagi Yojimbo. And this was alongside Gianna Sisters and Donald Duck's Playground. It was the game I played the most on the C64.
Huh, okay. So this is interesting then, because so the C64 is actually a system that I don't have that much experience with comparatively.
Yeah, we keep getting comments like every time. There's two questions I get more than anything. How tall is John, and when can we play some C64? So you're about 6 foot, and we are playing C64 finally.
Yes. So here it is. I like this title screen. This looks pretty good. So,
Are you familiar though with Usagi Yojimbo? Because before we jump into the game, I want to hear more about like how familiar are you with this franchise?
so that's a weird thing, is I'm not sure how familiar I am in the sense that, like, as soon as I saw the art for this, I was like, wait a minute, I recognize this character.
Right.
But it is not something I've actively looked into or read for a long time, so I actually don't remember a lot about it, which is why I'm curious to know more.
Right. So before starting the game, it's still loading. Yeah. So Usagi Yojimbo is a comic book. It is actually the longest-running independent comic book in the world, done by Stan Sakai, wonderful person in real life, and it tells the story of Miyamoto Usagi. Which is based on the historical figure who appeared in games like Samurai Warriors, and there's a version of him appearing in the game John loves called Musashi Samurai Legend, I think, on PS2. So it's...
Well, I mean, I like Brave Fencer Musashi on PS1, and I guess Samurai, the second game on PS2 is interesting. It's very flawed, but
wonderful soundtrack.
that's the thing. It has an amazing soundtrack, some cool ideas, but also, it's a little bit... It's mixed. Yeah. But yes, I can see the comparison.
Right. So that figure has been retold many times in manga, anime, and comic books.
It's pretty much like the Journey to the East stuff, where it's like
pretty much
getting retold over and over and over and over
the
again.
Monkey King.
The Monkey King, yes, exactly.
There's several games based on that too. I'm sure we'll get to them because they're all terrible.
Except for one.
You're right. So yeah, this was my favorite comic book growing up. It started out as kind of one-off stories in 83 and 84, I think. Would go on to get its own comic book in 87. And I think the reason why most people would be familiar with this is the fact that the character of Miyamoto Musashi, and I should quickly mention something. His name is not Usagi Yojimbo. Usagi is the Japanese word for rabbit, and Yojimbo is sort of a bodyguard for person of importance. But the comic book is called Usagi Yojimbo.
Token is called like Rabbit Bodyguard.
Yeah, Rabbit Bodyguard.
Sweet.
Basically. He appeared in a number of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, both cartoons, comics, and action figure lines. I'm gonna go off the top of my head now, but I believe he appeared in the 31st or 32nd episode of Season 3 of the original cartoon of Turtles, titled Usagi Yojimbo. He would also appear in later cartoons like the 2001 cartoon and the 3D cartoon, my favorite TMNT cartoon, in fact. So he's always had a very close connection to the Turtles, and
that's probably why I'm familiar with him.
Yeah, that's why most people would be familiar with him. And the Ninja Turtles also appeared in Usagi Yojimbo, the comic book. So they've always had a love relationship that's been going on still to this day.
Just a year or so ago, there was a complete collection released featuring all their adventures together, and that one had some new artwork by Stan Sakai, and I think even contributions from Peter Laird, who is the co-creator of the TMNT.
So he's always been around alongside the Turtles, and as I mentioned, it's independent comic book. So Stan Sakai still is doing this comic book to this day, and it is still of fantastic quality.
Wow, cool. Well, you can check that out actually.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I think we should get into the game then, if that thing is ready.
So we got some wonderful loading screens here. We'll cut down on some of these. All right, so we are back an hour later. The tape has loaded. Man, the C64 loading times. We shouldn't. So I have this game physically.
They're not that bad usually, right? Like,
man.
I mean,
So this
actually, I don't know. My experience with C64 was always with 5 1/4 discs,
right.
not the tape drive. So, what? I mean, did you have a tape drive back in the day?
Yeah, so I had a disc drive and a tape drive, and the tapes could take up to 5 to 10 minutes depending on the game to load, and then it would literally just load a stage or a demo or whatever. So I mean, generally the games weren't big enough to be taking 5 minutes, but it did happen. Some of the later games definitely took that long. So, and this is a tape game.
All right, so let's get into the game here. I want to see what we got.
Yeah, so here you can see, first of all, let's just note the graphics here, because generally I think when people look at C64 games, so it's very well known for like chunky sprites, kind of questionable art direction quite often, and here the sprites are quite well defined and the backgrounds are quite lovely.
Yeah, they all C64 games usually seem to run in this sort of double pixel width mode.
Right.
I guess, but it does support native hardware scrolling at full frame rate, so 50 or 60 hertz depending on the region.
Yeah, so this is 50 hertz.
So a lot of C64 games still manage to look pretty smooth. This one seems to have pretty smooth scrolling.
It does. So here you can see this kind of introduces us to the peaceful part of the game, where you could see now that I was bowing to this guy, I offered him some ryo, and this kind of brings us into the karma system of the game. So you see on the top right there, John, there's a karma counter.
Yeah.
By doing good deeds and helping people on my travels, the game will dynamically sort of react to what I do. So by having higher karma, people that I meet will maybe offer a little bit more assistance in terms of what they're saying. They won't attack me, most importantly. And when we get to the villages later on, this also plays a little bit of an impact on how the game progresses. So, when we got to the PS2 era, we would have games like Way of the Samurai and Kengo and all these samurai games, if you remember, which kind of based itself on that system. And here in 1988, we're having an example of it.
Yeah, it's kind of the good evil system that would become popular, especially from a lot of BioWare games for a while, where actions would kind of influence how things would react, and it was fairly binary, but I mean that seems to be the case here as well.
Yeah, I mean it's an early example, but still
that's neat though. It's pretty ambitious.
It's very ambitious for the time, and as you saw there, I took down that ninja. Do note that when I killed him, that little spirit cloud came up. That's also from the comic book. But that introduces us to the fighting in this game, where the game changes to a much faster paced game. By tapping the button here, for example, I can swing my sword and parry. I can jump much higher, and his facial expression there also gets much more angry.
I know. That's interesting. So is that literally just there to show that he's in fighting mode?
That's just showing his state, basically. He is the original Doom guy. So, yeah, so here you have two modes of play then. You have one which is kind of like an adventure mode and one fighting mode. And I mean, the C64 was a one-button joystick system. I know John loves this configuration where you have to push up to jump, for example.
It's my favorite.
Yeah, I know. But by holding down the action button, then we can do all these things like this, offer, bow, and then by getting our sword out, our katana, we can actually fight. This game was developed by Beam Software, who had earlier done Way of the Exploding Fist, and most importantly, Fist 2, which is kind of similar to this game, but uses the International Karate fighting system for its combat. Oh, sorry, I got hit there. So yeah, it's a pretty nice looking game, isn't it?
Yeah, and I remember Beam. Wasn't there like a Beam Dog? No, or I'm thinking of like Infinite Laser Dog, which was, I think, perhaps my favorite developer name.
There's also Gremlin Graphics, one of your other favorites.
Oh yeah,
the Gremlin.
yes, Gremlin Graphics.
So you see here now, I'm just saying hello to these people, getting karma by being nice.
You're basically just wandering the plains.
Yes,
it looks
it's
like
a walking simulator, a very early walking simulator.
No, I think your comparison to Way of the Samurai actually is the one that makes the most sense.
Yes. Those games, yeah, because we are all samurais here, and it has the same fundamentals. It's quite interesting to see that. This little guy here is called Togage, which is from the comic book as well. And kind of in everything Usagi Yojimbo, you see these guys in the background, and if you see there, you see a ninja
enemy
hiding.
Oh.
And the music also dynamically changes. Got him taken care of, walking down the plains. This is actually kind of similar to the comic book in that every issue kind of has him strolling down and meeting new challenges and new adventures. Here's another interesting aspect of this game then, is that you can see here there's two paths, and the game actually has branching paths and different routes to take. So
that is neat. Okay.
Yeah, so by choosing either to go straight forward or up, the game will change in how it progresses. And I'll go up here just to kind of show that walking animation. But this takes us up to the mountain ranges.
Oh wow, that's actually a rather
very cool,
nice,
isn't it?
Yeah, for C64, I'm always amazed at like what developers were able to achieve on this platform, considering its very strict limitations.
Yes. There's very few games that actually are this pretty. Here we have to go into combat mode to jump over there. And here's another one of these people.
Can you like attack them?
You can attack them, and they will affect your karma, and also other. What will happen is that other Ronins and warriors on the road will start to maybe not trust me so much. And
is that entirely driven by the karma system?
Somewhat. So
I'm just wondering. I'm trying to think about what the code would look like for this. Like how they're just how simple it might be in terms of just like, okay, they're just looking at a couple values to determine the state of the player, like how friendly you are. Okay, that guy just came out of nowhere.
Yeah, so he was.
I love how they kind of almost run off screen.
Yes.
And then they come back. You think, oh, okay, they're leaving. No.
So in fact, this will not be a long play of perfect gameplay or anything. I will probably die 15 times, and that's fine. If people want to see the endings to this game, track it down, check it out. Here we're actually coming up on our first boss battle up here. So,
can you go in that? Okay, yes you can. Okay. Yep. Wow.
And just look at the size of that sprite too, and just the detail. I mean, there's not many games I can call on the system that. We died. That's okay.
Okay, so you are nothing.
I am nothing right now.
Okay, cool. Unless you start.
For the first continue, yes, we'll start here. I have some more energy and such. Yeah, so when talking about the code, it's interesting actually, because the programmer of the game, I forget his name, Doug Palmer, I think, I actually talked to him a few years ago about this game, and I know he did a interview with Retro Gamer like 15 years ago. And during that, he talked about just the ambition they had for this game, and it was originally 3 times the size of what we actually did get. Each level was going to have all these different scenarios where Usagi had to help, bystanders and such. One example he brought up was like someone being dragged by a horse, so you had to time your katana slash to cut the rope so he was saved. Saving people out of like a burning village, all these things. And he lamented that like he wished that karma system that we talked about was a little bit more dynamic, because it is while very impressive for the system, it is not as dynamic as you might think. Oh man, this guy is killing me. Talking.
It is kind of as dynamic as I would expect, though.
True.
Given the platform.
And I mean, in 1988, as a 5-6-year-old kid playing this, I must say that for me, this was like stepping into a living world, where you'd pretty much the effects of what you were doing had a very real effect. So I would argue that it actually worked out quite well for them, despite the design document being so much bigger. Man, I am sucking against this guy.
So how many were there any other games based on this?
So that's another interesting part we should talk about, is the fact that Usagi Yojimbo never really, because he is owned by Stan Sakai and it isn't independent, there isn't as much as, say, like Ninja Turtles in terms of merchandise and such, other than the action figures and whatnot. And while there was attempts at making other video games in the 90s, there was supposed to be a cartoon from Fox, I remember, in the 90s, where there was a video game attached, and that never happened. And of course, another interesting thing, maybe for you to hear, is that they planned on making a cartoon called Space Usagi, with action figure line and video game attached to that as well. But because of another certain rabbit in space, I guess there wasn't enough space for 2 rabbits up there, so that was canceled.
That's true. The question is, what other rabbit would dare? I guess not this one.
I guess so. So, yeah. And so for many years, this was the only video game based on Usagi Yojimbo. I must share a story here that I had a little bit of an impact on something that would come up later.
Okay.
Many years ago, I worked for a larger video game publication, and during this time, I guess somehow the developers of a new game had found out that, hey, I was a fan of Usagi Yojimbo, I worked at this publication, it would be advantageous to talk to me about this game. They sent me an invite to check it out. I think the company was called Happy Giant. I don't know if they're around anymore. And I checked out the game, and it was a beat-em-up kind of akin to the TMNT and such. But this was it was kind of back then when games looked like Flash animations, if you remember that time, where like every limb was kind of independent, and it didn't look great. It looked fine in stills, but when you played it, it looked like ragdolls. My contention, though, with that game was the fact that the very first cutscene, the character comes up and introduces himself as Usagi Yojimbo. Now, as I mentioned, that is not his name. So being the only outlet doing a preview on this game, my feedback on the game was like, they hadn't done their research and the game doesn't look that hot, and there was no other previews of the game kind of online at the time. So I'm kind of worried that I caused that game to not be as successful as maybe it needed to be for them. And I do apologize for that today. But they should have done their research. His name is not Usagi Yojimbo. The game
I could have seen Konami doing a game based on this, but
and in fact there was talks for longest time for someone to do a game on it, and it just never came to fruition. And I don't know if Konami necessarily was involved ever, but the other companies
no, probably not. I mean, they already had Bucky O'Hare and Turtles, which kind of it's kind of
so
it kind of covers the ground there, but yeah.
So that was so there was another game there, and I think that game was ported to Steam. Maybe I'll go check that out after recording this. But it was a mobile game, not very good. And that isn't the only time he appeared in a video game, though, because there was a TMNT game on GameCube and PS2, Xbox, and GameCube, I think, called Battle Nexus. Oh, got it.
I do remember Battle Nexus, yes. One of those.
Underrated game, actually, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's not bad.
Yeah, it's not that bad. And in that game...
It's an unlockable, one of the arcade games in it, right?
He's in the battle mode. He is a secret character you can fight. So he appears
okay.
there officially, and there was a recent fan game called the TMNT Rescue Palooza, I think, or Pizza Palooza, or some Palooza of
Oh
some
yeah,
kind.
yeah. I remember that.
Yeah, based on the open Beats of Rage engine, and in that game you can play as Mr. Miyamoto.
Huh. That's super cool. The way of the samurai is long and sad.
Yes, so these people will give you kind of different Zen philosophies and such.
Thank you. Thank you. I like how they write thank you as a singular word there.
Yes.
This is weird for me to see just because it's really outside of my realm. C64 plus this franchise.
Yeah, and it is interesting that it's American franchise, Dansakai is an American Japanese, and it was only released in Europe. There is a Spectrum version of this game, in fact, plays similar, and
Oh, I bet that's beautiful.
actually, see, the thing is that the comic book is black and white. And because of the
Oh.
extra graphical fidelity from being black and white, the sprites having a little bit more detail, backgrounds being a little bit more minimalistic, that game is among the best looking Spectrum games. And because it is in black and white, it looks very, very close to the original comic book art. So it is one of the few Spectrum games I own physically, just because I actually do think
Wow.
it is a showpiece title for that machine. Oh man, I wish I could just. There you go. So this, in fact, I have a framed photo where I edited together the first stage as one long mural, and I framed that when I was in high school. With
That's
the
rather
school
ambitious.
printer, yeah, with the school printer. I'm sure they were very happy with me using the ink this way.
No doubt.
Yeah, so, but I thought the game was so beautiful that I just had to get it up there. All right, got him done. We are on our way again. So, yeah, this, unfortunately, yeah, this Usagi Yojimbo as a franchise just never really materialized into a larger franchise for video games and such, because him as a character, you know, it is a kind of mix of Kurosawa movies and Zatoichi and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, of course, and I think it's such a great basis for a video game, and there's only two, and while this one is fantastic in my opinion, I just think if you were doing a game like Way of the Samurai on PS2, like we mentioned, that would have been such a great device for this character.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. I mean, that's the thing back then. Like, given the right developer, anyway, this could have easily become a popular thing, or more well known. Not to say it's not popular, but it's not. Obviously, it didn't hit the big time in the same way that, say, Turtles did.
No. Recently, though, there was an announcement that there will be a new cartoon by a French studio, Egmont. So we'll see if that actually
That's cool.
materializes. And yeah, I'm very excited for that. Something like what's that Cartoon Network's Samurai Jack?
Oh yeah.
Something like that would have been perfect for this character. And I always lamented that there isn't more, because this is my favorite comic book of all time, and I always felt like more people should know about it. This game, is very special to me, and it is very forward-thinking and quite different from the system, the microcomputer it's on. Other titles were not really doing this. I mean, other adventure games, such as Last Ninja and whatnot, which is very famous, I think holds up today because of its music more so than anything.
Yeah.
The gameplay has aged. It's one of the few examples where that the game has aged badly is actually true. Here, just cutting quickly in here, that like we're in the village now, and you see some new scenarios. That guy wanted to draw first blood, and we did, and he's fine. It's just a flesh wound. But and here, it was a ninja all along.
Oh, that's cool. So he's hiding in there.
Yeah.
He was a ninja all along.
And you saw I could actually hit that shuriken and defend myself. So
That is cool, actually. Yeah.
So, But yeah, so this village kind of gives us a different taste of things here. He's
that's funny.
meditating. Did not like that. We got karma from it though, so it's fine. He's fine. So yeah, here we go into this forest area. Yeah, just look at how beautiful these backgrounds are.
Yeah, it does look great. You're right.
Like if you just stand still and look at this, to me this is like video game art. I mean, for me, games like Another World and such, kind of that's real art in video games, and I do argue that this comes close.
I mean, I can see what. That's a tough one.
It's a tough one, but for me,
Another World is kind of, you know.
Oh, I just mean in terms of minimalism in video games, creating this kind of artistic vision.
You're right. I'm kind of impressed with the sense of scale they've managed to deliver here for a C64 game.
Yeah, the fact that each stage, yes, you are going left to right. There, this is not a revolutionary, but what makes it different is that you encounter different characters who have different intentions and different behaviors.
Exactly. This is not China Warrior.
This is not China Warrior. So, and you can kind of see there's a ninja there. Ah, there you go. So the ninjas are hiding everywhere, like real ninjas.
That's pretty funny, actually. Yeah.
But yeah, we were mentioning Last Ninja earlier, and I argue that like Last Ninja doesn't work today as a game. Level designs or controls and such is kind of nonsensical, and it's all the music. This game, I think, takes a lot of that same energy, that kind of wandering Japanese mythology warrior thing, and does it much better. So I kind of think that this kind of deserves the same recognition as something like The Last Ninja, but on a gameplay basis, because the music in this game isn't as strong as the fantastic music by Ben Daglish. May he rest in peace.
Indeed.
So, and in fact, the music in this game was done by, what was his name again? Neil Brennan. And he's interesting to me because he also did the music for Asterix on the C64.
Oh, how is that one compared? Because I know the Master System Asterix games are quite remarkable.
Yes, so the Asterix game on C64. Man, we should play that one day. It's an open world adventure game, done differently from this, where you have to find all these different parts. It's kind of like a sprawling Castlevania 2, I guess. And when you fight the Romans, it actually zooms in SNK style. So an interesting game, but not necessarily a very good one. But I would love to play more Asterix for you in the future.
Yeah, we definitely do need to look through Asterix stuff at some point.
Yes, absolutely. The music, though, in this game, we mentioned Neil Brennan did the music for Asterix, but the music in this game in particular, I think, it's not bad. But when you listen to it, it's kind of a chopsocky. It's sort of closer to something of a late night kung fu dubbed kung fu movie type thing.
Yeah.
And on its own, if I listen to it on, a SID player, it's cool. It sounds great for the system. But for a game like this, where you're walking through these beautiful landscapes and the game has a little bit more to do with atmosphere and tranquility, I wish we had something like Rob Hubbard's International Karate soundtrack, even though that's just the Sakamoto's Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. Still, that kind of vibe, I think, would have done this game a little bit more justice.
Yeah, I think you're right, because this is really not that much of an action game. That's obviously part of it, but it's a much slower, sort of experience-driven game.
Yeah, much more of an adventure than basing itself just purely on the combat. So,
So, I mean, but is this how the whole game progresses then? You basically walk left to right.
Yep.
Until you reach the end.
So the overall goal of the game is to save the Panda Lord's daughter who has been kidnapped. The game never actually states this, but if you're a clever little boy, before we go to the branching paths here, there's a little kid saying, "Help me." And that is actually the goal of the game, is to save that little kid. But the game never outwardly states it, and has something to do with the comic book, where each issue is kind of like him wandering and then finding people to help. So it's a really cool idea to give this game a bit of a cold open, and then progress the storyline just via gameplay itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
So here you can see long stretches here where nothing really happens, but it's still, to me, it's such a cool. It's cool that the game is willing to take its time, and wow, these people are just murdering me. But it's still cool, despite dying, that the game allows us to take our time and just check it out. Just kind of enjoy this journey rather than forcing fights on us all the time and racing us.
Yeah, so it's funny actually thinking about it. I feel like this is a game that could have existed in an enhanced form on something like the PC Engine.
Yeah, and
like there's something very PC Engine about
somewhat,
this style of game.
I definitely agree that had this game just had a little bit more time, and Doug Palmer would agree, but had this game had another chance on, say, even the NES, but a PC Engine, Mega Drive, something like this, I think it could have been fantastic, and one that would be remembered as something very special.
Yeah, exactly.
I just love these small animations here too when he's eating, and the fact that his face changes and he's all happy when he eats. It's very cool. So you didn't grow up with the C64 like me, but is there any game today that you kind of enjoy the C64? Have you connected with it at the later stage?
So here's the thing, actually, is I had some light experience with C64 thanks to a cousin who actually did own one of them. And so I did have a chance to play on C64 here and there. But I don't have strong memories of it, actually. I just remember vaguely playing it once in a while at their place.
Right.
I remember more a different... Man, all my cousins had these PCs except for me. A different cousin actually had the Amiga.
Oh, okay.
I remember playing like Shadow of the Beast on there and being kind of blown away by it. Even though Shadow of the Beast is not a great game.
It's not a great game, no.
It was a stunning looking game.
Yeah, that's another game that's
nice
survived by its
technical
soundtrack.
feat. Yeah. But, so in recent years, I guess one of the games on C64 that's impressed me the most that I spent time playing with was the conversion of R-Type.
Yes.
Which looks and sounds amazing for this machine. It's very, very smooth, and it plays great.
You and I did a panel on arcade conversions on microcomputers last year, and we had a kind of section dedicated of that panel to R-Type.
Yeah, of course.
Music done by our dear friend Chris Holzbeck, and
that's right.
Started its life as Katakis, a game that was taken off the shelf for being too similar to R-Type, but being so good that Activision decided, we'll just license this game and make it into R-Type. So, yeah, the Commodore for me was, alongside the NES, the most important part of my gaming upbringing. And I mentioned off the top of this episode, like games like Donald Duck Playground. That game alone taught me English. So what you're hearing right now is thanks to that game.
That's rather impressive.
Yeah, and I actually met the programmer for that game, Al Love, who also made Leisure Suit Larry. I met him a few years ago and told him, hey, you taught me English. And he was like, oh, I'm very happy to have done so. It's like, how? I don't remember you. It's like, I played Donald Duck's Playground. It's like, yes.
Donald Duck's Playground.
So, Al Love is a wonderful person. But yeah, I played the C64 religiously. Not sure why that happened. I did take out my sword.
So there is another game that I remember that kind of impressed me from back in the day that I saw obviously later. I think it was a very late C64 release, but Mayhem in Monsterland.
Yes, that's kind of like one of the last official releases for, or
That was sometime in like early 90s,
yes,
if I
it
recall.
was. It was kind of close. I think it was 92 or 93, maybe even later. And that's a well-known game for just being technically a masterpiece. I mean, it scrolls like an NES game and has so many colors.
Yeah, the level of detail on the sprites and everything about it, it's a super impressive game.
Yeah. And recently, there's another game called Sam's Journey, which is kind of beaten out Monster Mayhem Land as kind of the most technically impressive platformer. I mean, I grew up playing mostly the shooters and the action games, not so much the platformers. I had Gianna Sisters on the C64 just via non-legal means, which was a very common thing back then. Also, Gianna Sisters, taken off the shelves. But I actually played Gianna Sisters before I played Super Mario, so I had an interesting wake-up call.
Nintendo sure did copy this.
Yes. I have so many favorite games on the C64 that we could probably do 100 of these Let's Plays, and I'm sure we wouldn't have run out of games from my childhood. Whether they're good or not, I don't know. But
it is neat though that I'm glad to see that C64 is still being pushed today. A lot of people still doing development work on it.
Yeah.
It's a really fascinating machine, and I love the SID chip as well. So it is disappointing. I definitely feel like I missed out by not having access to C64. In the sense, my first computer at all was actually an IBM PS2 8086 based machine, which, let me tell you, it is not great for action games.
Yeah, I believe you.
I mean, technically it had like MCGA graphics, which is IBM's special graphics that was basically similar to VGA.
Yeah, I was going to say.
For games that supported it. So you could actually get like 320 by 200 with 256 colors, which looked much more advanced than C64. But the speed of that machine meant you really couldn't do like smooth scrolling. It didn't support that in hardware or anything like that. And a lot of games, if they didn't support MCGA, you would just get 4-color CGA, which was terrible. Like I bought stuff like Double Dragon for the IBM PC, and I remember playing this, and I'm like, oh, it's in CGA. It's it looks awful. It's not smooth at all.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because here, I think in the US and such, if you were talking video games in the 80s, especially after 84, NES and NES and what else was on the market then? Primarily when people were playing video games, they were either playing it on the NES or in the arcades. Here, we had the C64, we had the Amiga, we had the Master System, which was another one of my childhood favorites. Then the NES, the Spectrum.
What about the Spectrum?
Yeah, so the Spectrum was mostly a UK thing. A friend of mine had the Spectrum. And,
what about the Amstrad CPC?
So that was a French thing. It was British as well, but the French went crazy for that one, for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think my wife actually had one of those.
Yeah,
their family had an Amstrad.
I think public schools and such in France made the use of the CPC quite a bit. It was a versatile little microcomputer.
For sure.
Yeah, and there's a ported Jim Power I like on the CPC, and yeah.
Of course, French-made game.
So.
Oh, this is interesting stuff.
Yeah, but it was a very different market here for us in Europe. You're talking about the home computer, and I think that was more viable in the US than it was here because we had all these micros that offered such great games that, I don't have much memory of the IBM computers as a kid because I grew up with the C64 and then went on to the Amiga, which were wonderful gaming systems. But later now, especially getting to know you, there's a lot of these DOS games and even earlier now, very interesting. It's a world that I'm not too familiar with. So we're kind of contrasting each other here with how I didn't grow up with these home computers like you did, but they had something to offer as well.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not like, C64, I think, was reasonably popular and successful in the US. There was definitely a following for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Less so the Amiga. I mean, it was around, but I really don't think it took off in the same way that it did elsewhere.
Unfortunately, the Amigas. We see the Amiga today as a successful little thing, but should remember that when it came out, that was a gigantic flop. I mean, they really, the price point and such when it first came out was very difficult.
Yeah, precisely.
So it was only when it became more available in Germany and the UK and such that we really saw the power of that thing come to fruition.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, when we playing this, I'm trying to think of games on the NES, for example, because that would be the nearest. In 1988, that would be its main competitor in terms of a game like this. But can you think of any adventure games that were like this on the NES, with kind of like this dynamic systems and such?
It's actually, I mean, with this, I mean, the system pretty much just seems, it's either you're kind to somebody or you fight them depending on their state, but that variability based on your karma, I can't think of anything that directly comes to mind.
No.
As far as a game like this, I mean, specifically this style of game, the idea of just walking slowly left to right in a very kind of open plane, that was relatively common, of course. I mean, just seeing this makes me think of something like Swordmaster on the NES.
Oh, Swordmaster. Yeah, I mean, I get kind of what you mean with that forest layout and.
Yeah, exactly. It's like something about the visuals and the forest and just like walking this way,
that
fighting
is a
enemies
great
on the way.
Soundtrack, by the way, the Swordmaster.
Yeah, it does. But obviously, this is a little bit different, and it is cool to see what they were trying to do back on that system.
Yeah, I think, as much as I just love the comic, and of course this is causing me to love the game even more, but just looking at what they were trying to do in 1987, 1988, this is beyond most other attempts at the time. This was a time where people were generally being more safe with what they were designing and going more for these arcade style easy platformers and such to get into, the pick up and play games. So a slow-moving adventure with multiple types of play and the dynamic karma system and all these things is very much ahead of its time.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish they would have attempted some of that fake parallax scrolling. I don't want to say fake, but where they would alternate, update the scan lines at variable rates to give the effect of perspective.
Right. Oh yeah.
That was actually there's stuff like that done on C64 for sure. And, there was plenty of tricks like that, but this game is actually pushing a lot of relatively large objects, I guess, sprite wise.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So the name convention of this game is also wrong. As you can see, he called me Usagi Yojimbo up there.
So there's no game that got that right.
No, other than the Battle Nexus.
Oh yeah, that's right. So what are your top C64 games? Is this up there?
This is definitely my top 3.
Wow.
And that is not just from nostalgia. I think there's so much to this game that I think it is on the platform a great enough experience that I would call it one of the best games on the 64. My top games would be, of course, the Giant Sisters and Donald Duck's Playground, as mentioned. I have a great love for a game called Space Taxi, which was this fun little game where you had to fly around, pick up people. It had, I think, some of the first digitized voices in the video game ever in that game.
Oh wow.
And international karate, of course.
Is that before or after B-17 Bomber?
Bomber? That is a great question. I would have to look up the release dates on B-17 Bomber.
Mattel Electronics presents B-17 Bomber.
I do enjoy that.
As do most people, I'm sure.
Oh, you must pay a toll to pass.
Yeah, so there's some
Interesting.
different
So,
scenarios here. We're
did you
just
pay?
repeating
What
this
did you
game.
pay? Did you pay karma?
No, I pay
Or what?
real.
Oh, okay.
So I have.
That's the
it's-
currency.
Yeah, that's currency in this game.
I like how he has one brow kind of looking suspicious there. in his
So
little-
thank you for mentioning that, because you just said brow, right?
yeah.
In fact, yeah. So most people call that his eyebrow. It is in fact a scar that he got as a kid. So no one has an eyebrow in Usagi Yojimbo the comic book, but it looks like it. It gives him that rock eyebrow.
It really does. It looks like he's doing the people's eyebrow.
Yeah, it really does, and it's one of his trademarks. But everyone calls it the eyebrow. So, but yeah,
That's
is
pretty
actually
great.
not an eyebrow. So
Oh man. It is weird to see old photos of The Rock early on versus what he looks like now. It's like he looks like a skinny little kid,
yeah, he does.
but he was still like considered quite, he was pretty strong always. And then you see him now, and he's like, good lord.
I wouldn't tell him he looks like a skinny little kid to his face, but
No.
that reminds me that my love for wrestling games has been documented in books, but there was one game on the GameCube called Day of Reckoning 2, which had a pretty good create a wrestler system, and I actually managed to create the Ninja Turtles and Usagi Yojimbo in that game.
That's pretty good, actually.
Just to tie this together with the wrestling talk. So
That is, as an aside, though, looking again at his portrait up there, the thing that's really bothers me in a weird way, like a nitpicky way, is the way the black outline on his right ear there. I guess it would be his left
yes,
ear. How it sort of like
it goes into
clips
the frame.
into the white frame around his portrait. I mean, I get it, but also like, why not just extend the box around it one
Yeah.
more pixel over?
I don't know. It's just meant to look like he's kind of in the foreground, I guess.
Yeah, it's a weird one.
I wish someone made a Doom mod with like that portrait instead of the Doom guy.
Oh yeah, in place of Doom guy. Yeah, I mean, I guess we've seen a decent chunk of the game at this point.
Absolutely.
So, is there anything else you want to add to the mix before we wrap it up?
No, I'm just really happy to finally be playing some C64, and if you think this looks interesting, go check out the comic book when comic book stores can still be accessed again. And yeah, if you have memories of the game, do hit me up on Twitter. I would love to hear what your memories are of this game.
Most excellent. Well, I think that's going to do it for now. So this has been a little bit different than usual, but it was enjoyable to discuss and see a game like this on the good old C64. So be sure to let us know if you want to see more old micros. I do have an Amiga here, so got to do something more with that at some point, which would be great. But for now, that's going to do it. So thanks for joining me.
No problem.
And if you guys enjoyed this, as always, be sure to let us know. Give this video a like if you did enjoy it. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell, and all that goodness. And of course, find us over on Twitter to discuss, well, anything really. And yeah, until next time, stay retro.
And play
CDI.